All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing our Arkansas Razorback 2025 preview and prediction. Getting things started, recapping the offseason along with his staff. Sam Pittman enters his sixth year. Bobby Petrino will enter his second year as the offensive coordinator. And then Marcus Woodson and Travis Williams will split the defensive coordinator responsibilities, third year each for them. And in terms of recruiting, they're 33rd in the high school ranks, and then they did the 17th best portal class, pulling in over 20 commits in each of those regards. And they ended up winning the Liberty Bowl, going 7-6 last year. So a pretty impressive mark for this football team. Getting things started with the offense, Nick. This is a group that was actually very good last year. If you look at the numbers, they were top 50 in every single category. This is a team that was able to put up 31 points per game, mainly because Taylon Green was such a good player for them whenever he was healthy. At 6'6", 230, he was a really good runner. This is a guy who uses his size well, possesses speed. He's a long strider. This is a player that also shows good control with his throws while on the run. I think he can throw a bit high when it's towards the boundary, though. He showed the ability to stretch the field as a touch passer. Needs to learn to be able to diagnose defense and manage pressure better. He had plenty of turnover-worthy plays last year, but overall he grew as a passer from year to year when he transferred in from Boise State. What do you make of Taylon Green, Nick? Because this is the type of player you want when it comes to leading you to big-time victories, going on the road against tough opponents. This is a good quarterback here that can make you pay. He also had a lot of mistakes last year.
Excited to talk about Dalton Green and the Arkansas Razorbacks, our first preview of the year. Happy being back to doing this again. And we're starting with an offense I think is very fascinating as they come into the season. Green, I thought, was a really solid quarterback at times last year and added a dynamic part of this offense. 30.9 points per game is really not a bad number at all. A top 50 number in terms of points per game, as well as about 460 yards per game. 10th, in the nation is a really solid overall number. I think this is a lot better of an offense than people realized last year that was able to do some things on the ground and through the air. Green was really solid on the ground, about 600 yards rushing and 8 touchdowns, about 4 yards per attempt, and was also pretty solid at times through the air. 6% comp rate was reliable and steady for him. 3,100 yards passing, 15 touchdowns, not bad at all. The 9 interceptions, you certainly want to find a way to cut that down. I think if you're a fan of this team, they had a lot of success running the ball last year, about 2.5 touchdowns per game on the ground, 5 yards per carry, and 184 yards. So there was some seriously nice offensive production on the ground, led by Green, who you really have to scheme for and build around. He's really plugged into this offense quite well. They're tailor-making it for him to be a really solid running offense with a quarterback that has phenomenal legs and really good accuracy, as well as running down the field, really good field vision to find and make those cuts to avoid tackles. I'm excited to see what type of jump he takes up stepping forward here. The running back room is certainly getting reshaped this year, so I'm curious to see what that looks like, as well as this offensive weapons room at wide receiver that's adding some interesting different talents across the board here. This is a quietly good offense last year that returns his talented quarterback that's hoping to make that next step forward.
Nearly 3,800 yards for Green. Of course, he was the second leading rusher with 602 and 8 scores. This was as punishing of a running game as you'd meet, Nick, because they had 3 guys that were all over 230 pounds that did pretty much all the rushing for this football team. Green was one of those. Jaquindon Jackson departs. Braylon Russell's going to step in as that number 1 back. 6'1", 253. He brings a lot of size to the table. He's a complete bulldozer. He's going to be a power runner for you. Showcases some quick feet while moving downhill. He seems to drag bodies with him. He has some solid speed to the edge. The guys behind him, Mike Washington, comes over from New Mexico State. He was pretty solid with the Aggies and Buffalo before that as a zone runner. 6'2", 215. A.J. Green returns. He was at Oklahoma State for a year where he didn't play for them. He was previously with the Razorbacks. 4.7 yards per attempt in his 3 years here previously of Arkansas. This is a respectable rotational back. I think this is a good room, Nick, for what they want because they have that physical specimen leading the way. But in terms of game-changing backs, I'm not sure if they have that right now. Washington's going to have to take on a big role. And if he can, bring good production to the table, we'll certainly be able to continue to have success running the football. But right now, I'd say this is one of the weaker rooms in the SEC.
Certainly a weaker room in the conference. They lack that big game changer. Russell, who was a true freshman last year, returns for his sophomore season, is slated to be the number 1 running back for this team. About 350 yards rushing for him last year, 5.3 yards per carry, and 3 scores in 10 games. So decent appearance numbers there, about 35 yards per game for him. Also had a couple grabs out of the backfield. You rattled off 2 solid backs there in Green and Washington, who transferred into the program. One player coming back after previously being there, not getting a whole lot of love. Washington, I think, is a player that you want to keep an eye on, potentially being a solid back for this team as well. And of course, Green's going to run the ball a lot. He's someone you have to scheme for, someone that's going to be really talented in moving the ball on the ground. I certainly expect this offense to dip in their running production just based off the numbers they have in the room, but I think this is still a unit that could find a way to grow throughout the season. Definitely a weaker unit in the conference right now, but I think Braylon Russell still has a lot of high upside potential that can be untapped and really uncorked this year.
Completely revamped wide receiver room. We'll look at some of these guys they got in the portal. Courtney Crutchfield, he didn't play at Missouri last year. This is a player that in high school showcased great leaping ability, good ball skills in the air, has nice speed, nice smooth route runner at 6'2", 180. He was a 4-star recruit from Missouri. Omega Blake, really good playmaker for Charlotte as an outside wide receiver. He was dominant versus man, showed good focus, and he was physical when covered. Not much yak, but enough speed to stretch the field vertically. He's also 6'2", 180. Overall, they added 5 guys in the portal. Cam Shanks from UAB was a good yak player out of the slot. Solid safety blanket there. And then Raylan Sharp, he was a pure slot machine with elite hands. Only 4 drops in 3 years over at Fresno State. Jacaden Ferguson, he's an incoming 4-star who should make a splash due to his route running and some good hands. They also just picked up Jalen Brown from Florida State. CJ Brown saw a few reps as a freshman. He comes back. And then a great ad here, Nick, an underrated one at tight end. Rohan Jones, 500 yards and 9 touchdowns for national title, FCS Montana State. Pretty good blocker as well. I think this is an offense that's going to be tough to contain, especially if Arkansas is probably going to be trailing in a lot of these games. They're going to put up some numbers.
Yeah, this is certainly an interesting offensive weapon room, and I think Jones is the guy that I'm most intrigued here. Coming up from Montana State, was really productive for the FCS national champion runner-ups. They had a really good season last year. He's a really big physical blocking tight end. I think they can really use him in that offense. Use him as an extra lineman, also use him on certain different routes in the red zone. Expect him to be a red zone target this year. I think Omega Blake is a really solid player that could slot into Z. I think he's looking to step up and be a really solid player here. Courtney Crutchfield as well, making the move over from a fellow SEC program. Didn't play a whole lot there. I think he'll be a really solid add for this offense as well. They're looking for some help out of CJ Brown, who returns as a true sophomore. Is he going to have a good season? I think he's a solid asset at the wide receiver X position here. Raylan Sharp could be really good at the W, a talented player overall that they're bringing in that's hoping to have a really good season, steady hands, hoping that he will avoid any drops like he did at his previous stop. I think this is an offensive room that certainly, has a lot of different guys that are plugging in. There's some high upside potential here. I think it's a weak room in the SEC, certainly, but I think these are some guys that could potentially step up. I'm looking at Blake there. I'm looking at Jones as well. 2 guys that could be big difference makers on this offense.
Now we move to the offensive line. Sam Pittman's bread and butter. Hasn't always showcased that prowess, though, when it comes to this group. I think at times they've underperformed. This year's group, I think, will take some strides. For Nando Carmona, he was overall a solid left tackle in his first year in the SEC, coming over from San Jose State, 6'5", 322. He's going to be moving the left guard this year. He's been used in that role in terms of practicing all year in 2025 so far. He's going to be making room for Corey Robinson. He's a phenomenal addition from Georgia Tech. He was an elite pass blocker, has good experience. So I think that left side is going to certainly make some, noise, I think, this fall. Marcus Dummerville was quite poor for Maryland last year. He enters his 6th season of college football. They added a 3-star true freshman transfer in Kevin Broussard. They also got Shaq McCroy, who's 6'8", 375. They could slot in at left tackle. So a couple of different options here, I think, for this offensive line. At center, they picked up a great guy in Caden Kittler. He comes in from UCF. He's yet to allow a sack in his career. I think that's pretty impressive. Amarian Harris played 400-plus snaps at left guard and left tackle last year. He has versatility and size at 6'7", 300, but he did struggle a great deal for this team. Keyshawn Blackstock returns, also played 2 different positions and struggled, but he seemed to play better and more consistent when he was on the inside. I think this is an offensive line that has plenty of versatility, Nick. I think Harris is going to get slotted at right tackle to start the year. They have a lot of transfers here, though, a couple of good ones. Again, I think they'll take some strides this year. A lot of versatility, a lot of size. I'm not sure who exactly will be that standout, though. Maybe I'm eyeing Corey Robinson, though.
A lot of versatility, but not a lot of good versatility. These guys played a bunch of different positions, but no one really excelled in any of those positions. I look at, certainly at the right side with Harrison and Blackstock. I want to see what they can do this year. Can those 2 guys step up? Harris potentially playing at right tackle this year. I think that can make a lot of sense for him. I think Robinson was a great add from Georgia Tech. This is a guy that's played some serious football, a good veteran player that can be really solid at left tackle. I think he'll be a good leader protecting Taylor Green there. I think Kittler was a great add from UCF. I'm excited to see what he can do here, taking a step up in competition. Should be a really solid move for him. I think he'll excel and be the top guy for this offensive line. Bubba Craig could be a solid add out of the portal. They've added a bunch of different guys here. They have a lot of different pieces to work with. Pittman, obviously known for his O-line work at previous stops. He's got an opportunity here to mold this O-line and put together 5 guys that are really strong and physical for this unit. I think Robinson will certainly take the lead and be the best player on this offensive line. It's a weaker unit, again, just like the rest of the offense, a weaker offense compared to the rest of the SEC, but I think there are some solid pieces here. I'm looking forward to seeing what Robinson Kittler can do in a Razorback uniform.
Offensive verdict for me, this group generated lots of yards due to Green's skill set last fall, but have a completely revamped skill group that will collectively need to be strong as there's no proven contributors. I like the variety across the board as, all groups seem to have versatility. I think this wide receiver room could certainly shock some people. If they nail the offensive line, can be a tough out on most Saturdays. I'm going to go ahead and give it a modest B, Nick, just because even though I'm excited for the receiving additions, I think that coming into the SEC is going to be a completely different ball game. Not fully sold on much in the running back room. And again, kind of like the receiver room, the offensive line, I think they can be good, but they'll have to prove it before I bump my grade up. I think B+, that was certainly a good ceiling for them.
I think B is certainly where they are right now. This is an offense that's got some good players. They return a great quarterback who has a chance to continue to step up, bring back a nice back as well, a leading back for this team. And Russell, I think, could be really solid for them. I like what they added in the portal on the offensive weapons front as well as on the offensive line. Can this unit step up and certainly be a better unit? I think it's possible. A weaker unit in the conference right now for me, but overall I think it's a steady unit that will get them to win some games.
Moving to the defensive side of the ball, this is a group that added 7 players in the portal. They returned 3 starters. I think the Ole Miss game is a great example of, all the weaknesses coming together at once. No pass rush, no cover ability. That's why there's so many weaknesses with this defense. Even though the numbers aren't, atrocious by any means, they could certainly reach that level. Look at the defensive line. They get a great run defender back, a true leader in Cameron Ball, 6'5", 324, pound nose tackle. Ian Gifford was pretty solid in his near 200 reps. Also lots of size at 6'5", 388. Donnie Salil didn't play much last year. He comes in at 375 pounds. They picked up a great run defender in David Oakey from Abilene Christian. He's only 290 pounds, though. 2 incoming 4-stars. They should see time early. Kevin Otis possesses good strength. Reginald Vaughn, he's only 260 pounds, but has versatility, so might spend some time at edge. His pass rush was quite weak last year. They have a 280-pounder in Quincy Rhodes. He's really expected to merge this season. Lots of length, good motor. Ken Talley, a transfer from Michigan State. Didn't do a whole lot last year, but he did get on the field. And I think Justice Boone, he can be a really good player. He had a torn ACL, caused him to miss 2023 for Florida. But he was respectable in his limited reps last year. As shown in the past, he can be a good run defender. This is a player that fights offensive linemen well with his hands. He's got some explosiveness. A 2-year man in Charlie Collins should be a big playmaker as well, possesses good physical traits. They also just recently picked up Philip Lee from Troy, who was a respectable edge player for them. What do you think of this defensive line, Nick? Because, they really underperformed last year. The pass rush was really non-existent for most of the season. They only came away with 26 sacks, but those numbers are a little bit skewed because, of course, Landon Jackson was great. They kind of teed off on some weaker opponents at times. But they did have 4 against Tennessee, so they stepped up. But right now, this is a questionable group.
Certainly a questionable group here that doesn't return a whole lot of returning production. Brings back a few guys. Ball highlighting that 47 total tackles for him, 4 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, and a fumble recovery for him. Not bad production. I think Ball will be a really solid asset for this team. And the interior, playing him at nose tackle, big physical guy that could be really solid. Quincy Rhodes, they're looking for big things out of him coming off the edge there. I think this is a guy you want to keep an eye on coming off that right side. Has a solid move, some good footwork as well. 15 total tackles for him, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack to boot. Want to see what he can do this year as he steps up. Charlie Collins got some decent reps last year. They're expecting big things out of him. David Oak was a solid add as well out of the portal who could really be involved. Justice Boone, if he's fully healthy, he's a big weapon as well. Otis and Bell, the 2 freshmen, are really solid adds, I think, from the recruiting class. They could potentially step up. Certainly Otis could be involved early on at defensive tackle, fighting for reps as the season goes on for this team. This is a unit that's got to prove a lot to me, right? I think this is a weaker unit, certainly in the conference, and a weaker unit overall. I think they have a lot to prove. They got to find a way to put pressure on the quarterback early on, put some solid numbers on the field to help out your offense by, getting your defense on the field, making some good things happen, get some good sacks, put some pressure on the quarterback.
Look at the middle of this defense. We figured Xavier Story would be a great breakout player from them, transferring over from Georgia, and he ended up having 99 tackles, 9.5 TFL, and he had an interception as well. So he was phenomenal for this defense in the middle. He's a player who's a great athlete, lots of tenacity as a blitzer as well. He does a good job slicing under linemen with his quickness. Overall, they have a nice tandem returning, though, because next to Story, Steven Dix, he was a really good player. Very impressive tackler, shows nice discipline. Overall was good in coverage as well. Depth, though, seems a little limited at the moment. They do have a 4-star in Tavion Wallace. He's a versatile player, high-end athlete. He can rush the passer as well. He has the speed to be a sideline-to-sideline playmaker. And they have Bradley Shaw, who's a 4-star in last year's class, who barely played but is known for having good football IQ, speed, anticipation. Not a bad group here overall, Nick. I love this tandem, one of the better ones in the country. Depth, though, certainly will be tested, especially with Brad Spence traveling over to Texas. I like what they have here as a 1-2 punch, but again, the depth is a little iffy.
I really like what they have as a 1-2 punch. I think it's the best unit on this team overall. I think Sorley was really good for this team last year. Top returning tackler, top tackler on this team last year. 99 total tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, a pick, and a pass breakup. Really good production there. I think Steven Dix was really solid as well. 72 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and a pass breakup for him. He was the third highest tackler on this team. Really solid 2 players to return there. Both these guys are big guys that are really solid over there. They had good years last year, expecting big things out of them. Tavion Wallace is a really solid add as a true freshman that can get involved early on. I think he's a really talented, speedy player. Has a lot to learn, but you could see him get some reps early on and maybe he will do a thing or two against some of the weaker opponents on this schedule. Bradley Shaw, they're hoping big things out of him, who was a previously high-level recruit for this program that I think is a really solid asset overall, who's hoping to get some reps potentially. A good unit. I like this unit a lot. The best unit on the team, in my opinion. This is a really solid linebacking core.
Now you look at the secondary. This was a group that I thought would be a lot better last year, and at times it was good, but for the most part they struggled. Jaheim Singletary has showcased good run-stopping ability, but he was a big problem for them in coverage. Kenai Walker, 2-year starter for Oklahoma, solid in coverage, should assume a big role early. I really like Jordan Young, coming off a really impressive season with Cincinnati. He was very reliable in coverage. Also picked up a top-ranked JUCO player in Keyshawn Davila. Selman Bridges didn't play last year. Caleb Wooden coming over, after 2 good years for Auburn. He wasn't a full-time starter, but he was good in coverage in the slot for them. They have redshirt sophomore Jabri Shaw, who looked to carve out a role in the cornerback room. Nick, the pass defense last year, again, at times it was solid, but overall 111th nationally. The Ole Miss game is a great example where they gave up 5 touchdowns to a single receiver. They were just getting absolutely cooked, and it's because the corners could not cover, and it's largely the same group. I think Young's going to come over and make a big impact, but it's going to take more than just one guy.
Singletary wasn't phenomenal last year in coverage, 25 total tackles for him, a pick and 2 pass breakups. A good run stopper, but really not that great in coverage. Wooden, I think, is a solid add. You can see what he can do early on. I think he's a guy that's got some good veteran reps in the SEC, a guy that you can be involved in this defense. Selman Bridges is a guy that they're hoping will step up as well at cornerback, potentially fighting for starts with him against Wooden here. I am a little worried about this unit, right? This is a unit that doesn't return a whole lot of production. Singletary has to be better in coverage this year. He's got to take a big step forward. And I think whoever plays on that right side, Bridges or Wooden, they're going to have to find a way to be solid and strong in that secondary. This is a secondary that's had some issues last year. They're going to have to step up this year and be a lot better.
Missouri, Texas A&M, and Tennessee, they all held to under 200 yards passing, so they could step up and make plays at times. 562 and 7 scores, giving up a dart in Ole Miss, though, and they allowed 60 points in that game. Just an example of how bad things can be, especially when their pass rush struggled. The Oklahoma State game early on was also another example of that. The safety group comes in at much better standing, though. Miguel Mitchell was pretty good the back half of the year as a run defender. Not much of an asset in coverage, though. He's also 220-pounder, so what can you really expect from him? Larry Worth also carries a lot of size, 6'4", 224. He was bad in coverage, but he was a real tackle machine for them, who's also stout versus the run. Quintavious Scandrett, he was very good for Eastern Michigan for 3 years, has been an efficient player in coverage, really good tackler, has limited ball production. I think he's going to come over and make a nice impact here in the SEC. Akari Johnson will also fight for some time in his second year. Hard to think this pass defense will be worse, but they might get cooked downfield. The middle of the field, that is, with these safeties, and I think these cornerbacks, they'll be competitive, but if they have the same issues as last year, Nick, they could certainly regress. But again, I pointed to some instances where they were very good against tough opponents, so I think overall they will improve in the back end.
Mitchell was productive in the few games he played, only played 5 games with 20 total tackles, a tackle for loss, and a pick for him. Hoping he stays fully healthy and can be really solid for this defense. Worth, they moved him around a little bit. He's a versatile player. They can play him at linebacker as well. He's got a lot of different versatility. 54 total tackles for him, 2 tackles for loss, and 2 pass breakups. He's a really solid, coverage asset, a really good tackler as well. Want to see what he can do this year at strong safety, a decent player. They added Scandrett, from Eastern Carolina. He could be a solid player for them as well. Could get some reps at strong safety. This is a secondary that I think could potentially be competitive. I think it's a decent unit. They weren't ridiculously bad against the pass at times last year against some of those tougher opponents, like you said, but still were 111th nationally, giving about 245 yards per game through the air. Got to find a way to improve that, giving up 25 points per game last year as a defense as a whole. Got to find a way to improve that as well if they want to win some ball games in the SEC.
Defensive verdict. I think the pass rush will likely take another step back, but I think there's plenty of size along that defensive front, alongside a very good linebacking group to stay relatively strong against the run. They were pretty good against that last year. Secondary did a good job bringing in competition and some experience, but if the pass rush doesn't bring more heat, could be tough due to systematic improvements. Overall, I think this is going to be a C+ defense right now. Just a lack of proven playmakers, Nick. I'm not sure how many of them are going to break out. Again, I think they'll be competitive for the most part, but against the tougher defenses, if the pass rush doesn't show up, you're going to see, again, all those weaknesses come to a head at once.
Certainly a defense that's got to prove it, a weaker unit. I think a C+ is a fair grade, maybe even a C is a fair grade for this defense. They have a lot to prove, a lot of work to do. I want to see if these guys can step up. I'm concerned about that pass rush for sure.
Now looking at Arkansas's 2025 schedule and the prediction. Thing for the Hogs, they bring a good offense to the table of a versatile group of pass catchers and a dual threat quarterback that's likely to produce at a high level. Once again, though, this slate is going to be a gauntlet, meaning if they want to make a bowl game, the defense will have to lean on toughness and improved playmaking. It's just such a hard team to predict, Nick, because it always is such a tough schedule. I mean, Notre Dame at home, you already play a pretty tough non-conference schedule. 5-7 from both of us. It just seems like the right prediction for this football team. Again, I think they're capable of a lot more. It's just hard to pull the trigger against some of these opponents. I think they might have something for Notre Dame and for Auburn, Nick, and the game against A&M is always close. So this team can definitely win 8 games and be, top 20 ranked ball club if they can pull off those victories. I'm just not going to pull the prediction. I think Sam Pittman, though, has himself a pretty quality ball club coming into 2025. Right now, 5 wins is the verdict from me, though.
Dalton and I try to find some differences in our predictions a little bit, change things up here, but you and I both agree at 5-7, the same exact 5 wins. I think it just makes a lot of sense with this team. It's unfortunate because this is a talented team, but the schedule is quite tough. They potentially even lose that trip to Memphis. It's a very interesting matchup out of the non-conference. Kind of bizarre. They're playing Notre Dame at the end of September at home. Really odd game when I first saw it on the schedule. I like it though, right? Give them credit. They're playing a top marquee opponent, an independent opponent in Notre Dame. That's really a fascinating matchup. Maybe they could give the Fighting Irish a run for their money early on. I'm certainly curious to see what that team looks like this year. We'll preview them later in the summer, but an interesting matchup on September 27th. I think they give Auburn a run for their money as well. I'm not as high on Auburn as some people. I think they still are a team that has a lot to prove to me this year. They could catch that team off guard, just like they caught Tennessee off guard at home last year. I don't think a lot of people thought that this Arkansas team would beat Tennessee last year. They found a way to get the job done. They could potentially upset Auburn as well. It's the one game that I'm leaning towards as a big potential upset here. The rest of the way, though, I think the schedule makes a lot of sense. Definitely keep an eye on that A&M game at Jerry's World. Always interesting matchup played down there in Dallas. Tough schedule certainly for Sam Pittman because I thought there was a lot of progress last year that we didn't really expect. They won a bowl game. Have to give the guy credit. The 3 bowl games that he's played in so far as a head coach here at Arkansas, this program's won all 3 of them. They won the Outback and now 2 Liberty Bowls. They had a bad 4-8 season in 2023. Got back to a winning record last year. Won a bowl game, which I think is an impressive mark for a school like Arkansas that's really not pumping out a lot of high-end talent and is certainly slugging it out in the SEC, trying to bring in those big recruits, playing at a campus with a fan base that really does care about this team. Unfortunately, a 5-7 prediction just to a tough schedule that's not helping due to 2 really marquee opponents in the non-conference, in my opinion, including a good group of 5 team in Memphis. 5-7 for the Razorbacks this year, wondering what they can do. Maybe they can pull an upset here and get to 6-6 or 7-5.
Yeah, I think they ultimately probably will. They're certainly going to scare somebody that's highly notable. Again, solid ball club here. Nick, as always, appreciate you joining me. Good to be back, kicking off 2025 previews in style with a good Arkansas team here.
Most wonderful time of the year, middle of May, when we start knocking these out, getting these going, and really working on these previews. I'm excited for this college football season. I'm excited for another full season of previewing the FBS teams, the Power 4 teams right now. Excited to see what these teams can do, and excited to talk about Arkansas kick off the season. Always love talking about the Razorbacks. Great fan base, a really great stadium they have down there in Fayetteville, and a really talented roster that can really prove some things this year.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.